perda de poder dos Estados Unidos, que se tornou óbvia nos últimos tempos, foi anunciada há 10 anos pelo sociólogo Immanuel Wallerstein, no livro O Declínio do Império Americano. Mas Wallerstein, um dos mais influentes sociólogos das últimas décadas, não se limita a vaticinar o fim da hegemonia americana. O que ele anuncia é a desintegração do sistema capitalista. Os exemplos, segundo ele, estão em toda parte. Não só na crise da economia americana, mas também na implosão, que poucos esperavam, do projeto europeu. Nesta entrevista ao Milênio, em seu escritório na Universidade Yale, Wallerstein fala do período em que estamos entrando, descrito por ele como de caos total, dando lugar a um novo sistema, não se sabe se melhor ou pior que o atual. E do otimismo pregado por ele, pois vivemos numa época privilegiada, na qual pequenas ações individuais podem ter consequências históricas.
So, do you think your main contribution is creating world systems analysis?
Yeah, I would say that's my main intellectual contribution, yes.
And is there a short way to explain to the public what that is?
Well, there's not a short way, but let me underline the essential elements of it. For one thing, most of 19th and 20th century social science assumed that the state was the unit within which things happen. World system analysis comes along and says this is not the unit within which reality has been occurring in the modern world. The unit is a much larger unit, which we call a world system, and in particular the modern world system is a capitalist world economy. So that's one basic element. And the second basic element is the insistence on the importance of temporality. And this we get a bit from Brodel. It's the longue durée. So these two elements, the sort of geographic element that the unit of analysis is a world economy, which is not the whole world but a world, because it begins as part of the world and by its inner logic expands until by the end of the 19th century it incorporates the entire globe. But that's so spatially and then temporally. So we say, it's very controversial, that this modern world system began more or less in the long 16th century and is still in existence today. So I think that captures the heart of it. And then it says that, I suppose there's another element, which is that the artificial distinction which was created in the 19th century between the political sphere, the economic sphere, and the socio-cultural sphere, as though they were autonomous and separate from each other, is just a piece of propaganda of classical liberalism, but it isn't the reality. And the intimate interrelations between all these spheres and the fact that we all operate simultaneously in all of them is part of any sensible way of looking at the world. Okay? And I suppose there's a final element, which is, we take this one from Prigogine, which is that systems, all systems from the universe to the most micro possible system have lives. They don't go on forever. So you have to figure out how they came into existence, what their rules are while they go on what I call their normal life, and then because they always move far from equilibrium, they come into a crisis, a structural crisis, and that has, it bifurcates. The system bifurcates. It will go in one direction or another, but it won't keep going as is. And I'm claiming that the capitalist world economy is in fact now in that structural crisis and won't survive very much longer, but we don't know what's going to replace it. That's the big issue before us.
So after 500 years of capitalism, why is it coming to an end?
Well, then you have to trace the processes by which the system runs into trouble. First of all, you have to talk about how capitalists make money. Capitalists can't really make a lot of money out of production anymore, and that's undermining the value of capitalism to capitalists, okay? So that's one thing. And the other thing is the political stability of the system was guaranteed for a reasonably long time by the dominance of centrist liberalism, which assured people that slowly but surely everything would get better. They just had to be patient and leave things in the hands of specialists. And that was exhausted in 1968. People don't believe it anymore. So they don't believe in the stability of the system. They don't believe in the inevitable future. You see this now very much around the world. And you have a system in which capitalists aren't really making money anymore. The only thing they can do is speculate, and speculation has its limits. We're running into that right now everywhere. So it's bifurcating. But bifurcating means it can be, you see, it's very important to understand intrinsically impossible to predict how it will come out, because it's the result of an infinity of decision-making by an infinity of people at an infinity of moments. No one could possibly, it's impossible. However, we can say it'll go in basically one direction or another, and I call that, I give it, it's just a code name for me, I call it the spirit of Davos and the spirit of Porto Alegre, which will appeal, no doubt, to Brazilian audiences. But basically I say the spirit of Davos is that the capitalist system has been a system which has been hierarchical, exploitative, and polarizing. It's not the only way to do it. You could find another way to do that. So the spirit of Davos is to find another way to do it that isn't capitalism. And the spirit of Porto Alegre is to say, well, we want a world that's relatively democratic and relatively egalitarian. They don't know how to do that institutionally, but that's the direction in which. And this is the bifurcation. This is the two possible ways in which the world is moving, and it's moving constantly. It'll take another 20, 30, 40 years, and suddenly, one day, as though by magic, it'll flip, and one or the other path will be taken, and then we'll be into a new system. I don't know its name. It's not important. What's important is it the type that I call the spirit of Davos, or is it the type that I call the spirit of Porto Alegre? And I can hope for the best, but I can't assure you. And I don't offer. History is on nobody's side. I keep repeating that mantra, because too many people believe history is on their side. History is on no one's side. It's the result of what we do, and what we do in this moment of structural crisis.
What do you think of that, Occupy Wall Street?
Well, I think Occupy Wall Street has been a fantastic success. Absolutely no one predicted. The moment seemed to be just right. And what it's done is suddenly people found it responded to what they were uneasy about, unhappy about. And of course, it's not the only thing. There's the so-called Arab Spring, there's the Indignados in Spain, there's Oxy in Greece, there are even things in China.
Russia, no?
And, well, you know, no place is safe. Let me put it that way, because no place there is no sense of certainty. What's happening right now is a kind of paralysis, because people feel so uncertain about what will happen. They do nothing. I'm talking now that's what the banks are doing. They're not lending money, right? Well, because banks want to make money, and they're not sure that they lend money. They've got to have that kind of minimal certainty of the next couple of years, and they don't have it. So, and that's of course a self-reinforcing thing. If they don't lend the money, then you know, then somebody else can't start a project, and then et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
But if I understand well what you write, what is certain is that we are entering a period of chaos.
Yes.
It's going to be very hard and much worse than it is now, right?
Right.
So what is this? Sometimes you write hell on earth, or dark times, troubled times. So what is coming ahead?
Well, look, first of all, I mean, hell on earth. Why is it hell on earth? First of all, there is physical insecurity.
Yeah.
I mean, if I compare the world to the world I knew 50 years ago, there are just a lot of places. I mean, I used to feel secure moving around in most places, not everywhere, but you knew there were a few zones here and there that were dangerous. But here, now, I don't feel secure anywhere, personally, and I think many people feel like me. So that's terrible. Secondly, I don't feel secure about money, right? I have X number of years to live. I want to live them not in desperate poverty, so I'm worried about the money I have invested here and there, just at a personal level, right? And this terrible uncertainty leads me to be unsure what I should do. Then I have to worry about my children and my grandchildren because the things look miserable for them. You know, when I was, let's say, 15 years of age, I pretty well knew that I was going to live economically and financially better than my parents, and certainly better than my grandparents. And now it's the opposite, isn't it? The children are going to live less well than I, and the grandchildren may live still less well. Well, that's not very comforting. So, and then there's the geopolitical turmoil. I mean, we're definitely at the end of U.S. hegemony. The U.S. is just one major power in the world with a lot of others, of which Brazil, or Brazil leading South America, is certainly another major power. There are 8 or 9. Well, that's an awful lot. And when you have a situation where you have 8 or 9 powers strong enough to sort of make their own policy and make their own alliances, what happens is they keep shifting alliances. They try to figure out, you know, is South America going to ally with Europe? Is it going to ally with East Asia? Is it going to ally with Southern Africa? And they play games. They all play games, right? They move, and they keep. So you want to tell me where the world will be, let's say, let's not take it very long, 2015. Or 2020, who will be allied with whom? Not clear at all. That's a very uncomfortable situation.
From the point of view of Brazilians, we are finally getting out of poverty.
That's right.
We are becoming this new power. We are growing. And while the main powers, the U.S., Europe, and Japan, are declining, we are going up with China and India. So what will happen to us in this period of chaos, of the end of capitalism?
Look, you're certainly doing better than you were doing 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, not to speak of 100 years ago. No question. And basically, a chunk of the surplus value created in the world has shifted to you away from the U.S. or from Western Europe or so forth. Nonetheless, how shall I say, it's a bit of an illusion, I think, for the so-called emerging powers, or the BRICS, to assume, well, okay, now it's our turn, and we'll be on top, the U.S. and Western Europe will be somewhere down there, because that would have been true 100 years ago, or 150 years ago, because there's always been movement within the world system, who's on top and who's in the middle and so forth. But because the world system is in such crisis, structural crisis, you in a sense make the structural crisis worse. You see? Because what you're doing is you're including still more people in the division at the top.
That lowers the profits.
It lowers the profits overall, and therefore and furthermore, you need customers, right? That is to say, it's not just, can't just produce, you got to find people to buy that stuff, and China is now worrying about that, and India is now worrying about that, and Brazil is just, maybe it's the last of these to begin to worry about that, but it's a real problem, you know. I mean, it's all well and good to say we have X, Y, and Z, but who's going to buy them? Do they have enough money with which to buy it? I wouldn't sit back comfortably if I were a Brazilian or a Chinese or an Indian and simply say, well, the future is with us, come back and see us in 20 years and you'll see how well we're doing. I don't think that's really what's going to happen.
One interesting thing is that because of all this total uncertainty, individual action makes a huge difference, right? Explain that.
Well, you know, we have had for 2,000 or 3,000 years in the Western world this philosophical debate. Is the world a determinist world or is there free will? Right? And the sides are the same, and the argument has been made constantly, certainly since the Greeks and so forth. I say historicize that debate. It isn't a question of one or the other, but when one and when the other, okay? So my argument is when a system is in its normal, a historical system is in its, what I call its normal phase of operation for a couple of hundred years, things are relatively determinist, meaning no matter how hard you try to change it, things get pulled back to equilibrium. And a good example are the two most famous revolutions in the modern world, the French Revolution and the Russian Revolution, and how after X amount of time it got pulled back to equilibrium. It wasn't a lack of energy put into it, of social attempts to transform the world, but they didn't transform the world. Now then I say, when you come to the structural crisis, because things are fluctuating so wildly, free will prevails. That is to say, every little action, every nano action by every nano person at every nano moment affects the outcome. That's what I call free will, or the prevailing of free will. So, you know, that's, from my point of view, an optimistic way of looking at it. We can really affect the world in a way that our grandparents or our great-grandparents couldn't, however much they tried, really affect the world. But I also say it's 50-50, right? And that's a lot, not a little, okay? 50-50 is a good chance, not a bad chance, but there's the other 50, you know, and they may, the other side, I think of them as the other side, may win out. I can't guarantee.
That would mean a world with more inequality, probably.
At least as much, and maybe certainly more. It could be a world with a much, how shall I say, tougher, harder hand, in which people get hit on the head much more quickly. I don't know, you know.
And the alternative would be a more democratic and egalitarian world.
But
so what kind of individual action now can help this more egalitarian, the spirit of Porto Alegre world to win?
Well, I see. On the one hand, I think, you know, the kinds of things that all these world social justice movements are doing in terms of trying to awaken people to the reality of what kind of world are we living in, okay? And I think that has an impact. I think there's no question that people learn and are learning and cutting through, what shall I call it, the official lines, which we all incorporate into our mentalities, and now we're trying to get them out of our minds. And I call this unthinking. We're trying to unthink the things that we have been taught in our schools, by our parents, by the governments, by everybody. I think we can try to de-commodify the world. The capitalism is a system which tries to commodify everything, bit by bit by bit, turn everything into a commodity. These days, you know, the latest things have been water, the body, but you know, we can try to create economic processes which are de-commodified and so forth. We can refuse to participate in all kinds of commodified structures. So that's another thing we can do. And we can protest vigorously, you know, protests actually, they work up to a point. People who are in power do back down at various points when faced with enough protests. So, you know, try one thing, try another thing. I'm very empirical about this. There aren't a list of perfect solutions. Keep trying, see what happens, see what works. If it works, keep doing it. If it doesn't work, stop it, do something else. And this then is linked also with what's our philosophy, right? Is this a civilizational crisis? In other words, is growth an objective per se, which not only capitalists said, but the classical Marxist parties in effect said, or is bon vivre? But what does that mean? And how does that relate to other issues like the rights of women and so forth? So it's not an easy, I'm not arguing these are easy things. I'm arguing they have to be talked about, and they have, and some attempt to create, because if we are the 99%, there's no point in defining ourselves in such a way that we end up being the 10% politically. If we're the 99%, then we want to pull groups together without diluting it entirely, okay? And that is the political problem for all these movements right now.
So, a final question. So we are entering this long period of increasing chaos. It's going to be very hard. We have already entered it, and it's going to get much worse. But you're still so optimistic. Why?
Well, how shall I say, what alternative do I have?
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you
very much. Thank you.
Okay.